Hello everybody, and welcome to Some Patches Required, a show where we hope to educate and entertain you on the ever-turbulent games industry. As always, I'm one of your hosts, Zach.
And I am your other host, Aaron.
And before we get ever closer to our topic at hand, which will be the EA purchase that has recently happened, I do have some things that I do, in fact, need to run through. One of them being, please like and subscribe. Hit that interaction button on whatever platform of choice that you decide to listen to our show on. We greatly appreciate it. It helps us know that we're doing at least not a mediocre job at what we do. Thank you for the love. In addition, if you could share this show with a friend, or as we like to say, a mortal enemy, we'd also greatly appreciate it. As I said, this week we are going to be talking about the privatization of EA, which happened because it was purchased by a consortium, which is a fun word to say, of various independent, why am I blanking on, private investment companies. We're going to get into that, but specifically we care about IP today. And because we care about IP, I've got a question for all of you, which is, what IP are you concerned about being impacted negatively by the privatization and purchase of EA?
Yes, indeed. I have several. So to kind of move us in the direction of the conversation, and we will do a little bit of explaining the buyout of Electronic Arts and who exactly is doing that and what sort of the implications are there. First off, we know that we are tremendously late to the party on this one. Basically, everybody who has an opinion on this incident has already shared it ad nauseum and has hit a lot of the same beats as many of the other commentators on, again, this particularly huge sort of tumultuous moment in the games industry. So we are actually kind of to tie into what you said here a moment ago, Zach, was we're going to be looking at this largely from the angle of what happens to Electronic Arts intellectual properties as a result of this big, acquisition. So there will be lip service paid to all of the many legitimate issues going on politically with this buyout, but that's not going to be the sole focus of our conversation today. Just to sort of get out in front of that before we dive all the way in.
Yeah, the short of it is that a lot of people have already covered this topic, and they've done as good of, if not better of a job, discussing a lot of the specific details about why you should be concerned, why it might be bad for the games industry. We don't need to retread all of that in as much depth. But just as a quick summary, EA...
Please.
About a month ago, I believe it was September 29th, was confirmed that they sold the company for $55 billion. $55 billion. It was acquired by the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, Silver Lake, and Affinity Partners. People were particularly concerned about the PIF, or the Public Investment Fund, because Saudi Arabia has a horrific track record of treating human beings like human beings. And generally speaking, they've been trying to whitewash their image by buying comedians, buying sports. They've just got their hands in a whole lot of things to try and sway public perception.
Yeah, if you're familiar with the whole multi-layered dramatic odyssey of the Saudi Arabia Comedy Festival that was going on here back within the last month or two, that is very much tied into the sorts of issues that we're sort of glazing over, but are absolutely worth looking into. So do please feel free to do that. There's, Human Rights Watch and a bunch of other organizations that have done a phenomenal job of tracking human rights violations committed by Saudi Arabia, as well as, other bits to do with that entire side of things. So please do your research on that if you're not already aware. It's relevant, good to know information, and something to keep an eye on for sure.
And then the only other of the three in the consortium, again, fun word to say, is Affinity Partners, which is at least partially run by Jared Kushner, which is, of course, or maybe you didn't know, has a familial connection to Donald Trump. He is married to Donald Trump's daughter, so he is, of course, Donald's son-in-law. That was a really roundabout way of just saying he was his son-in-law.
And
I had to explain the genetics of it.
So they're not biologically related. They are related by a social construct that we refer to as mirage, wherein, anyway.
Not to be confused with the Mirage in the Desert.
And not to be confused with Assassin's Creed Mirage.
That's true.
Which is, of course, owned by Ubisoft, another great company that I'm assuming had some really raunchy dreams after seeing any other video game company valued at $55 billion goddamn dollars. Yeah, so we've got in the consortium purchasing EA, the Saudi Arabian government, the son-in-law and former advisor to divisive President Donald J. Trump, and then some other private equity firm. And it should also be noted at this point, crap, now I'm absolutely blanking on the name of the bank.
It's JP Chase.
JP Chase.
Yeah. So basically, the consortium did not have all of the funds needed to make the purchase. So JP Chase came in as the financer for this loan. So there is a $20 billion debt that's associated with this purchase, which the money was borrowed by JP Chase. So
yeah.
The way that the deal is structured is EA will end up owing JP Chase $20 billion when the deal closes, which I believe the deal already closed. But basically, when all of this starts to roll and it's officially a private company, there will be a lot of debt that EA has to pay off. Just to finish the other half of that, that means that the consortium spent a total of $36 billion to purchase EA as part of this deal. I think the other interesting thing, I'm not going to get into this in a ton of detail because I'm going to butcher it. And candidly, I would need to look into how loans work and whatnot a lot more. But based on the Bellular video that I watched, it put the link to Aaron, the debt is labeled as junk debt, which, if my understanding is correct on that, means that it's high risk. Like, there is not a high likelihood that it will get paid back quickly, and as a result, it is given a higher interest rate that EA has to pay off. So not only do they have $20 billion in debt that they have to pay, but it's also at like an astronomical interest rate because JP Chase views it as a high-risk payment, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a very kind of dirty, strange situation. I think the only other thing that's kind of fun to mention at a high level is that this is the largest all-cash sponsor take private investment in history. I know that was a lot of words I just said. I got it from Business Wire.
Thank you, Business Wire, for making us sound briefly like we know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we've got here is an enormous record-breaking purchase being made of a very large video game publisher that is the umbrella over an insane number of intellectual properties, some of which are on the scale of the most popular video game products on the planet, including Monopoly Go and the entire EA Sports, sort of milieu. And then we've got the political motivations of Saudi Arabia, the political ties of Affinity Partners.
Silver Lake. Oh, political ties. Yeah, sorry. Yes,
political ties of
Affinity.
Affinity partners
Yes.
to the current American administration, which I think if you're paying very much attention to what's going on in America, is, concerning in many ways. And then we just have your standard run-of-the-mill private equity in there. And all of that layered onto a deal that burdens the company immediately with an unfathomable $20 billion in debt on day one. So, yeah, big, giant, hairy mess. Big, giant, hairy political mess. And all of that sort of ties into our core questions, I suppose, which revolve around what happens next. Historically, what has happened, because there's not a great one-to-one comparison for purchases on this scale, because the closest we would have in recent memory would be the acquisition of Activision Blizzard by, Xbox and Microsoft. But again, that was not laden with the same exact issues that we're seeing in this instance, because again, that was a publicly traded company purchasing a publicly traded company and folding it into their existing set of operations. And we've already sort of beaten that, merger to death, as has everybody else on the internet. And there are still, commonalities that we can try and pull from that situation, in terms of predicting what happens next and how and why this consortium may choose to live with the debt, not live with the debt, how they will process that, what EA's sort of shape and purpose will be moving forward, and how that specifically impacts all of the different intellectual properties under that umbrella. Long, weird sentence, but I hope my point came across.
Yeah, I think not related to the IP discussion that we're going to have here. The kind of obvious thing is, and this happens pretty much any time, whether it's a public company buying another public company or a private company being purchased by another private, whatever. Whenever consolidation occurs, you are going to probably have some level of this isn't even exactly consolidation, because it's not really consolidating things. It's just going private, but there will be a level of cutting. That is always what happens when companies go private, or rather when they're purchased by private investment funds. You typically see layoffs. The reason that they do that is because these private investment companies come in, they start doing all of this analysis, and they say, you can do XYZ thing better. Look how we can save money, here by cutting QA staff or cutting HR or cutting, there's all these different mechanisms that they'll go in and they'll try to make more efficient in the name of profit. It's also important to say that there have been a lot of articles talking about how in the future, EA is going to really focus on AI game development. I believe that they actually just signed a big deal with Stable Diffusion not that long ago. I would have to double check that, but my point, I know that they went into a big partnership with one of the generative AI platforms. And so what do we see when that happens? We typically see, pardon my French, really fucking stupid executives think that they can just replace people with AI, and that's just never going to be how it works. I'm not going to speak on AI like it is completely without merit, but it is certainly not a tool that can exist in a productive manner without people to either feed it or operate it and make sure that the stuff you're getting isn't trash. So regardless, I bet that they're going to try and cut and then fill in the gaps with AI.
Yeah, which, I mean, we've certainly already seen the beginnings of at other companies, most namely Microsoft recently, where they've, mandated AI workflows and gutted staff and canceled projects and all of these things. My two things that we're definitely going to see, which dovetails nicely into what you've just said, I'm not sure if that's a dovetail or if it's just an inverse dovetail, but usually what we first see is a tweet or press release that offers vague but seemingly concrete sounding assurances that there will be no changes made to staffing or projects or anything for the foreseeable future. And then that will be followed at a later date by extreme numbers of layoffs and canceled projects and changes to the operation of the studios. Those are usually two things that we can guarantee when anything of this magnitude happens. We've already gotten number one. CEO Andrew Wilson has already stated that. And everybody, I think, by this point knows it's bullshit. And I think Andrew Wilson also knows it's bullshit. But it doesn't matter because that is the trajectory of things. You have to make the tweet, you have to put out the press release, and then you go and just strip, thousands and thousands and thousands of people of their livelihoods. And when you layer in the AI thing as, a strategic goal and an operational foundation for not just how you're going to, run your company profitably, but, how you are going to strip unnecessary, in quotations, expenditures from your ledger line, the layoff component of that is almost certainly going to be pretty extreme when the other shoe finally drops.
Yeah, it's not a great situation. And Mickey could have really stepped up. The mouse really could have stepped up. Disney could have, pulled down its pants and slammed its wiener on the table and said, "No, we want them," but didn't do that. I'm sorry for that very graphic. Metaphor, I guess.
No,
but
you're
no.
good.
In all seriousness, apparently Disney was looking at buying EA for a period of time.
And EA has such a sterling track record with making video games. I can't imagine how great that would have been for us and everybody who likes good games.
Yeah. No, Disney truly has succeeded multiple times when they've tried to go into games and totally haven't failed miserably. It's an interesting situation. It's an interesting situation. And what makes it even more interesting, and what I've noticed kind of a lack of people talking about, or rather what Aaron and I have noticed a lack of people talking about, with the exception that I do think Michael Bell in his video alludes to it a little bit, is EA has a massive amount of intellectual property, a massive amount of games that they're not necessarily doing things with. Some of these games are pretty big. Mass Effect, hasn't really had a recent entry in a hot minute. I would have said for a while Dragon Age would probably fit in that. Of course, a new Dragon Age game just came out. But there are all of these different games that Dead Space are under EA. What happens to those games that are not the Battlefields, are not the EA Sports titles when this purchase goes through? Because we'll get into it a little bit, but it seems like one of the biggest reasons that this purchase was made was as a mechanism to help launder and whitewash the Saudi Arabian state, government, etc., by continuing to just buy cultural relevance. They've been doing this. You mentioned the comedians. They've been doing it with golf. They've been doing it with esports. They've been doing it in soccer. They're just throwing money at their image. And they don't necessarily care about profit, but I'm sure profitability, or at minimum scope, plays an important role in that. And what games have the biggest scope? It's the sports games. And the sports games also cleanly tie in with the sports investments that they already have, like I said, in golf and soccer, etc. So it's an interesting situation for these games that aren't as lucrative or as influential as FIFA. Well, I guess it's EA Soccer now, or EA FC
EA Sports
now.
FC.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
They really could come up with a better name, I think, than that. But yeah, I mean, so the core and the Bellular video that we sourced for this does actually do a pretty good job of making not the argument, but like looking at this situation a little bit more holistically. Most of the other angles that I've heard take on sort of the IP side of this deal tend to start and stop with, I'm scared about BioWare. What happens to BioWare? And I think that is a very good question, because BioWare is, I don't know if canary in the coal mine is quite the right term here, but it is the most visible version, like the most visible example of what we're sort of talking about, right? it is almost beyond question that the main reason EA as an entity was purchased by this consortium of people. And I know I have an affectation that I'm putting on there every time I say that, but it is just really fun. So bear with me on that. The main reason that this consortium almost certainly purchased this whole entity is for the cultural cachet carried by the heavy hitters, the whales in EA's library. You've got your sports, you've got your Battlefield. To a lesser degree, you have your Apex Legends, and all of those various different things. The studios that make those are almost certainly safe to some degree. I'm sure that they're not going to be immune to, optimization and the intrusion of AI on the creative process, but those are the cash cow and the thing with the most cultural relevance globally. And like you said, Zach, they tie in nicely to the esports and general sports investments that Saudi Arabia has been making in the past. So those ones are almost certainly going to be receiving the majority of the investment moving forward because they're already the ones with the strongest foothold in a global culture. What happens to... I mean, EA has not exactly been a good steward of Dead Space. But I think that goes without saying. But, Dead Space is another fascinating example, and I think BioWare will almost certainly be something that I talk about in moderate length here momentarily, because it ties into both the financial incentives and the political incentives in a way that I don't think Dead Space necessarily does. But to discuss the financial side as it regards Dead Space momentarily, Dead Space was not exactly EA's favorite IP, because it never really hit the high mark that they were hoping for in terms of, actual sales. It has a lot of cultural cachet amongst, as they'd say, capital G gamers, people who enjoy single-player narrative horror experiences, and it has been influential across multiple generations, and the remake did pretty well. But though the series as a whole never really took off and went to the moon the way that the number crunchers were hoping. So that is a largely, to some degree, defunct franchise that they really only sort of reanimate the shambling corpse of in order to juice their profits with a comparatively inexpensive remaster remake, right? So what does the future of that IP look like? Is there a stronger potential for them to revive something with the name recognition among its core audience and people who are just aware of games in general? Or is that just too niche? What are they going to look at its performance, 2 generations ago when Dead Space 3 came out and use that as an indicator for whether or not it's worth pumping any money into to try and generate a new line of Dead Space games?
The biggest problem that we're going to have here with predicting the future is, one, we're not good at reading tarot, and two,
tarot doesn't work.
We don't have any real inside knowledge, Aaron and I, surprise, into the Saudi investment fund, right? Like, we don't know where their mind is at, because I could see the Bellular video even mention this, that if Saudi Arabia is basically trying to buy their way into the games industry, they're actively investing in like game dev education, trying to build stuff out in the actual country. So buying EA would obviously help with that to some degree, even though it'll remain headquartered in Washington, or I believe Washington. Anyway, regardless, there's a few ways they could look at it, because if they touch things too much, there's the possibility that they piss off the larger gaming audience, which is already more prone to be critical of EA because of the whole meme, haha, EA bad kind of thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't know, I can almost see it going a few ways. Like, I think there is a world where they may try to foster these more artistic looking game projects in the hope of building good faith with gamers, I guess. And I could see that as being a potential option. The kind of cynical part of me, though, feels like they're going to look at things and be like, okay, what either makes a shit ton of money or has mass appeal? And we want to invest in that. Because I don't think that they're going to want to overly invest in very like niche kind of experiences that only touch a few people. You know what I mean? I feel like they're going to want to have as much impact, as many eyeballs. They're going to want to do it as big as possible. Because if you just look at any of the projects, any of the things that Saudi Arabia has ever done, it's never small, niche things. They're always trying to be like the center of attention. You know what I mean? So I think there's a couple ways that they could go about trying to launder their reputation and build goodwill with the larger gaming public, because let's be honest, the majority of gamers probably don't even know about all the horrific shit that Saudi Arabia does. At most, they might hate Saudi Arabia because they hate Muslims. Like, being real honest, that's probably the biggest reason that a lot of people don't like Saudi Arabia. Not for the legitimate bad things that they do, but because they're Muslims. So, like, you know, it'll be interesting to see what happens here. And I think once we see the dust kind of settle, it'll be a little bit clear to make a guess about what happens with all the IPs. But I do think there is a world where they might foster BioWare as an attempt to kind of say, look, we're not changing anything. We're actually going to make BioWare better in some way.
Yeah. So I should clarify and my questions in this sense are almost entirely going to be rhetorical, because there is no reality in which we can accurately, except for to, by just law of large numbers, throw as many guesses out there and hope that one of them ends up being the thing. And then we get to, you know, claim our stuffed animal from the big prize wall. There's no fucking chance that we're going to actually know with any degree of certainty what this new private ownership is actually going to do, right? So again, I'm questioning mostly rhetorically. So yeah, I mean, I think in terms of trying to launder your public image, right? At that angle, let's say that the financial returns are less important to the consortium than the image laundering.
Well, real quick, we should say the majority stakeholder in this deal is the PIF. Too.
Yes.
So they have the most kind of on the line monetarily. Anyway, sorry, just wanted to illustrate that as we're emphasizing Saudi Arabia so much. Like, that's part of the reason why. Anyway, sorry.
And it's also worth mentioning that Affinity Partners has long-reaching ties to the PIF. So this is far from the first time that Jared Kushner's money pile and Saudi Arabia have gotten together to work on little projects. That they're you know, fairly established as being more than willing to work together on things like this. So yeah, let's hypotheticalize and say that an actual financial gain is of less importance to the goals here than the sort of social cachet, right? There become so many questions blossom out of questions, because yes, there is absolutely a reality in which you look at the dedicated fan base for games like the ones that BioWare has historically made, right? Which are rich in character, rich in lore, and generally bastions of representation, especially for LGBTQ plus communities. These that is one of the hallmarks of the BioWare game, and probably got Veilguard into a fair amount of trouble most recently because the political climate has shifted so far to the right. You know, the level of representation that those games tend to strive for is something that resonates with a huge portion of the gaming population. And it's something that it seems, by all accounts, is important to the people who work at BioWare. Now, that specifically does not align with the Saudi Arabian government's literal legal views on homosexuality or transgenderism as a baseline, right? Those constitute a great many of that government's human rights violations. Will they be comfortable shelving what they perceive to be their morals in order to fund LGBTQ plus friendly games just to convince people that they are friendly to LGBTQ plus people? That is an interesting question to me. I do not know the answer to it. And
my gut feeling is that they're fine with it because I think there's too much money for them to not buy into it. You know what I mean? Because corporations don't truly give a crap anywhere, but they'll, maliciously, or not maliciously, but like disingenuinely buy into stuff to like, say they're an ally or like look good or whatever the fuck.
You don't have to look that much further than like the exceptionally minimal, gay representation in MCU movies that gets put in just enough minimal volume that it can be completely stripped out and no plot important details are changed so that they can still release the movie to extraordinary numbers in China, right? They obviously don't actually care. They're a corporation, right? But in this instance, at the very least, no American corporation, to the best of my knowledge, has the legal authority to sentence somebody to the death penalty or imprison them for life for engaging in a same-sex relationship. So, like, on the scale of severity, there are some differences, I think. And I don't disagree with you at face value, though, that they probably will. The intelligent thing to do in terms of laundering their image would be to embrace BioWare, arguably more than any of the other artistic, smaller studios making IPs, right? Because that is in such incredible opposition to what that government stands for in practice. The idea that their money could be going to still foster those communities would be a fairly compelling sales point for them to be like, see, we're not that bad. So in a kind of messy way, I hope that's what happens. But the cynical part of me thinks that there's almost no financial argument that comes out in BioWare's favor after the last 3 games BioWare made.
Yeah, they haven't really been good stewards of their own IP, which is typically what you see being the case with Blizzard, as an example. When it was originally purchased by Activision, part of the reason that it had so much leeway and freedom was because Bobby Kotick and Activision leadership thought Blizzard could be self-sufficient and continue to get them the numbers that they wanted. When that started to falter, which has been the case for BioWare for almost a decade, it feels like.
Longer than even.
Yeah, you do not get the same leniency. So yes, BioWare is associated with some truly beloved IPs, but they have not been very good stewards of their own IPs, even if it's not entirely their fault.
Yeah. We can't, unless we want this to be a 5-hour episode, we can't get into the entire storied history of BioWare, and specifically going back to the Veilguard episode, just how many hurdles that game had to overcome to be released in anything approximating a playable state. The fact that that game came out at all and is as coherent as it is 3/4 of a way to a miracle. And, a lot of the criticisms of that game are still justified, and, it doesn't live up to the highs of BioWare, narratively, and certainly not financially, right? So my argument is that I think if they want to make the problem disappear in terms of compromising their, draconian stance on human rights with, representational issues within a video game, they would have a financial motive to just shut that studio down, and no number crunchers could argue that that was an unsound business decision. Which, again, brings me back to the sort of balance between the financial side of this and the representational, sort of reputational side of it, where if they are truly willing to sort of sit on that 20 billion and eat the interest and not streamline BioWare out of the equation, then the smartest thing they could do would be to let that game, the game series, blossom and flourish and give them the time and the autonomy to make the games as good as they can possibly make them, without live service interference or, being clamped down in terms of representation, right? That would go a long way towards buying goodwill. The question remains just whether or not that is going to be the avenue they take. But and again, I truly have no way of knowing which direction that particular, situation is going to go.
You're truly overcomplicating this, Aaron. They just need to buy the IP for Date Anything or Dungeon Daddies or whatever it is.
Right.
And just make an incredibly gay 2D dating game. And then all of America will be like, wow, Saudi Arabia is so cool. Sure, they had mutilated and murdered a journalist and then cut him up into little chunks, but like, look how cool this game is. I'm joking. I don't even think that
no
LGBT community would do that, but it would be really funny
not.
If they made like a very flamboyantly gay game. It would be pretty
Breaking
good.
news, Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund acquires YouTube channel Game Grumps and Associated Studio for IP rights to Dream Daddy.
Fuck yeah.
The dad dating simulator.
It's coming. I'm telling you. It's only
it's
a
gonna
matter
happen.
of
Yeah,
time.
I mean, there are certainly a lot of, I mean, you're I mean, like, farcical as it is, that is essentially what they'd be doing, though. Right? Like at its core, that is what they'd be doing. And again, that brings up a whole that we absolutely will not get into, but it does bring up sort of like a philosophical quandary in the idea that if this money is going to fund things that have a net positive effect for representation, but the money is provided by people who criminally punish that representation under their own regime, where does that land morally? Right. But, we obviously aren't going to dig into that, quandary, in any meaningful way here, because we simply do not have time to do so. But yeah, I mean, I think the BioWare angle is the best sort of comprehensive, holistic, it's a microcosm of the larger issue, going on here. But yeah, I mean, I don't have a ton more to say on that, I guess. I mean, I do, but within the purview of this conversation, in the interest of keeping it moving, I think that sort of illustrates the balancing act that we're going to see unfold here over the next handful of years.
Yeah, I think the final thing that I would say on this specific portion of the conversation before getting into the discussion of IP sale, before the end of this episode, I think that we're going, apparently analysts have been suggesting, this comes from a New York Times article, that EA is looking at trying to move away from premium priced games because they think that those games are in decline, and move towards games like Fortnite, free-to-play games. You can all say it with me, live service games. I think that is a hilarious mistake. I am not reading the market like it needs more live service games. If anything, I think that it needs less. Now, that being said, I do think that there have been some suggestions that they might try and move some of their PC console IPs onto mobile. So if that is true, then we're probably going to be looking at IPs that easily transition over to a mobile free-to-play format, and those will have some value. Can Mass Effect and Dragon Age do that? I don't know, maybe. We'll just have to see. But that's kind of the last thing that I wanted to mention, because there were some articles that there was a New York Times article specifically that was talking about how analysts felt that was the direction that EA would be going into. Now, on the note of BioWare, one of the other concerns, or I could even maybe say hopes, is that BioWare gets sold to another company. I think that, again,
a big Sony daddy comes in and gobbles it up, right? Or Microsoft or some other large publisher, like enormous publisher with many verticals, comes and just gobbles up a BioWare when it goes up for sale, if it goes up for sale.
Yeah. Well, I think that the main issues with that you kind of illustrated is there's only so many people that could afford to do that. You mentioned some of them. Some other, Tencent could certainly hope to do it. If we look at a lot of these, though, not only has BioWare not been a good steward of their own IPs, but a lot of the big places that could buy BioWare haven't been great. Microsoft's been laying people off. They've been doing some weird ass, who knows what the fuck their plan is for a while. Sony failed, or has been failing, to kind of own Bungie in any kind of a solid way. Now, I guess you could argue that Bungie leadership didn't make that easy for them because of some of the drama with like people leaving and just trying to get a bag. But like BioWare's not really maybe worth all the money that they'd have to spend to get it. And also, even more importantly than that, if you look at historically when entire IPs or studios are purchased, most of the time, it tends to be, at least based on the research that we did, it tends to be the result of some kind of bankruptcy auction. The big examples that I was able to find kind of in recent history was the purchase of a bunch of IPs from Midway Games by Warner Brothers. Specifically in 2009, they picked up Mortal Kombat, Spy Hunter, and Joust. I don't know Spy Hunter or Joust. I'm sorry if anyone's a big fan.
Everyone knows Joust. It's the old arcade.
I did not. I've never played it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And then the other big one was when THQ went bankrupt. There was an asset sale in, I believe it was 2013. Relic was sold to Sega. They, of course, make Company of Heroes, Warhammer 40K, Dawn of War. I should have said Dawn of War. Evolve got purchased by Take-Two, which is fucking wild, knowing where Evolve is now. Homefront got bought by Crytek. Homefront is not a good IP. I don't know why they bought it, but whatever. And then South Park got bought by Ubisoft. Or Stick of Truth.
Well, they made Homefront The Revolution, which is a very, very flawed game.
Yeah, they're all so bad. Homefront, spending any money on that, honestly, it's not, they should not have had to, they should have been paid to buy Homefront. That IP is ass, dude. Anyway, sorry. And then, of course, Gears of War is 2014. Gears of War got sold from Epic to Microsoft. That was not part of a bankruptcy action. Apparently, it was more of there's some articles that suggest Epic didn't know what to do with the Gears of War franchise moving forward, and they just needed some money to reinvest into the engine and other projects. This is before Fortnite. And then the most recent is that Hi-Fi Rush, Tango Gameworks, was acquired by Krafton after Xbox shuttered the studio. And that was in 2024. So my point of bringing all this up as quickly as I could was to say, I do not believe that any IP will be getting sold by EA. I could be wrong. Maybe I will need to eat my words, but I don't think that they're going to want to do it. Most of these companies, they'll shut down the studio and sit on the IP. That's what they did with Dead Space, as an example, historically. I'm trying to even think what other IPs are out there that I wish... I mean, I never really played Beyond Good and Evil, but like Ubisoft's been sitting on that motherfucker for a few reasons.
In pure theory, they've been working on a second game for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
Like, whatever. I mean, like, if that game ever comes out, it's going to be such a righteous train wreck. I doubt it'll ever see the day of light, but... well, I mean, actually, I think a bigger one for Ubisoft right now would be Splinter Cell, which they've just done shit with in the game space.
True.
Despite it being, I mean, they just released it was a new Netflix show that came out. But they've been incapable of generating a Splinter Cell game.
Ghost Recon hasn't had a new game in a hot minute too. I mean, not as long as Splinter Cell, but.
And I think was it Breakpoint was the most recent one there, and that had a whole bunch of the fuckery going on behind the scenes as well.
I believe so, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, most of the time when these IPs kind of fall out of the limelight, they just end up getting. You're completely right. They just end up getting sat on by their parent companies. And I think the narrative that lends itself to the idea that EA would be looking to offload some of these IPs. Or some of the studios that make those IPs is because, staffing people to make games that you're not sure are going to perform is expensive. And new EA is saddled with $20 billion of debt. Maybe they could make a quick buck selling BioWare to Sony, which, very minor, very, very, very minor side tangent. At the very least, I will say that Sony has been a much stronger steward of IPs in the single-player narrative space than they have the live service space. Most of their recent foibles have come with their ambitions for live service, right? Shuttered studios, canceled projects, the entire Bungie affair, the entire Concord affair, those are all big, massive, high-profile failures in the live service space, but their single-player games are still actually performing reasonably well. All the Marvel's games are absolutely crushing it in terms of sales numbers and also record-breaking budgets. The new Ghost game came out, and it's selling every bit as well as as Ghost of Tsushima did, despite having a smaller console install base. So there's potential there that if EA was looking to make a bit of quick money in order to offset some of their debt, that some studios might theoretically be interested in buying some of these larger IPs. The question there is again multifaceted. One, are any bigger studios interested in buying a potential headache? If so, would they be doing so at a reasonably reduced cost, almost such to the point that it would not offset nearly enough of EA's $20 billion debt to make it even worth their while, when they could instead just close it down and call it a day, or put whatever money it is they need to in order to buy the social angle of things. I think, I don't know, I think it's kind of unlikely that we'll see, because I've heard it floated even that because EA is currently structured in two separate divisions. There's the entertainment division, which focuses on your Star Warses and your BioWare properties and things like that. And then you have the sports division. And it's been floated that this purchase may be in the first wave of multiple deals, which may include the consortium selling off the entire entertainment wing in order to offset some of this $20 billion in debt, which I think is completely unlikely. I think it's pretty darn unlikely. Unless their only goal is to get Saudi Arabia's name out there in terms of sports and esports, I doubt very much that is likely, just because when you have the strength of something like the Star Wars IP, you're probably not going to want to separate yourself from that completely.
I mean, it's also that, and there's like Battlefield. There's a lot of things. I think that the way that the game industry works in terms of like consumers is that a lot of people play sports games that would not identify as someone that plays a lot of video games. So if you kind of want cultural relevance in games, you need to do more than just sports. Like, it's true that like those have the biggest reach. I play them on occasion, but most of my friends, the vast majority of people that I play games with, do not play sports games. And so if you're trying to launder your image at a larger scale throughout all of games and you're trying to build up a games industry, it would be weird to get rid of some of the big IPs that you have, namely at this point, Titanfall, Battlefield, the pretty successful Star Wars single-player games that have been coming out, and
The Sims.
The Sims, yeah. I always forget about The Sims. The Sims,
yeah,
there's always stuff going on with The Sims, but I always forget about it because I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I mean, those are, and they're so diverse in terms of the markets that they play in, that, you are looking at cultural saturation beyond, like, cross-generational cultural saturation beyond the sports crowd and beyond the shooter crowd. So yeah, I think that a whole like package deal sale is completely untenable and kind of counterintuitive to the goal as we believe it to be, which does leave that sort of piecemeal sale of individual intellectual properties or studios, which, yeah, Zach, I hate to say it, I do kind of agree with you, because in many ways I think it's wishful thinking in a lot of ways, because a lot of the time the worst stuff that happens to EA games is kind of the fault of EA. Again, BioWare being a good example of that. Veilguard, not to say that it would have been an incredible game necessarily simply by virtue of not having been meddled with, but it was started, stopped, rebooted, flipped, pivoted, and fixed 15 goddamn times before it landed on its final iteration. If that had not been a thing that was done to BioWare by old EA, there's every bit, every chance that the game could have come out and been a series highlight. So it's natural, I think, to want that sort of IP to be freed from the umbrella of EA, both old and new. But yeah, logistically, it seems unlikely to me.
Yeah, I just would say... Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, not that I wouldn't be interested to see what that would look like. It just seems unlikely.
I would be more interested if smaller entities were able to buy up some of these games. I think that would truly be the best thing because it would lead to a lack of consolidation. Truthfully, we don't benefit from EA selling any of their big IPs to other big publishers, which are then just going to further consolidate. Like Microsoft gaining Battlefield, these Star Wars games that have been coming out, Titanfall, we don't benefit from that. Sony getting those, we don't really benefit from that. It's more corporate consolidation. It's not great. The best thing would be if somehow all of this got sold to smaller entities, which isn't going to happen, but that would be super dope. I will say, real quick, that I think another reason these probably won't get sold is because when you're talking about the value of an IP, right? An IP can exist without the studio. They can destroy BioWare and still maintain Mass Effect and Dragon Age. And what can they do with that? They can license it out for TV shows, for animated TV shows, for Netflix, right? They can license it out for other video games. They can do so much stuff. So they could just decide, oh, these are really popular, like, cultural games. We don't want to run the game, but we do want to be the steward of the IP in the sense of delegating who can and can't make games for Dragon Age and Mass Effect. And that might be more lucrative for them than having a studio that has to make the games themselves. So when you're talking about like the value and the price of an IP, not the price, more the value, there's more to consider than just the studio and the cost of running the studio. Right? It might just be cheaper to hold IP and then license it out for ridiculous sums of money. Like, think about how many people would want to make a Dragon Age game, or how many people, more specifically, how many people would want to make a Mass Effect game or movie or TV show or whatever, right?
Well, it's already happening.
Well, yeah, and I was about to say that. But yeah, I don't know. The sad thing is, even if they like the IP, that does not save BioWare. The IP... is not the same as the studio.
Yeah, I mean that's we've seen that with Halo, we've seen that with a billion different things where the studio that creates a beloved IP becomes disenfranchised, right? They become separate from the thing that they created. So yeah, you're completely right. And in many cases, I think that the sort of cultural awareness of a lot of these IPs is inherently more valuable than the games that are being made using the IP. I think that's almost certainly true at this point of something like Mass Effect and Dragon Age, where the potential for that world to become untethered from games and the turbulent cycle of development that has been going on at BioWare for the last decade plus. Yeah, I mean, I can absolutely see that being seen as of considerable value, much more so than, just offloading the entire thing or opening it up for sale. So yeah, I think we're probably in for some more EA tomfoolery, insofar as all of these IPs go. Oh, did you have any more huge points to bring up before we do closing thoughts?
No, my closing thing on this is that I was just going to say I could in the BioWare discussion, if we're going to say something gets sold, I could see them selling Dragon Age. I think Dragon Age has had a rougher time really getting cultural relevance in comparison to Mass Effect. And I love Dragon Age. But of the two, it is the weaker IP, certainly. Just because, it just has not... The first game was so good, and then it just hasn't had kind of the exponential success that Mass Effect had from 1 to 3. It never reached that peak. So that was the last thing I was going to say, is if we're talking about BioWare, I don't see a world where they give up Mass Effect. I could maybe see a world where they don't value Dragon Age, but I don't know. It's not like it's a poopy IP per se. So
no, it's just a very uneven IP. Again, yeah, the first game came out and it was absolutely phenomenal. The second one was rushed out the door. Still a lot to like in it, but it's not as strong. Inquisition did killer numbers and got great reviews. I have my gripes with Inquisition that I'll save for a previous episode where I've already talked about some of them. And yeah, I can absolutely see what you're talking about. I think Mass Effect as a broader IP is less tarnished in the public view. It's also a lot more focused. Its sales pitch is a lot easier, and it's more immediately understandable to a wide audience than Dragon Age, which is very mired in its, politics, and, it's another fantasy world with a couple of interesting pivots, but sci-fi in the theaters, I think, is doing right now a little bit better than fantasy is. So it'd be interesting to see what they do with either of those. They'll probably just sit on Dragon Age, honestly. After Veilguard, I would be astonished if BioWare gets the ability to make Mass Effect 5, then that could completely change the course of their future, right? The idea that BioWare makes Mass Effect 5 and it's great means that they have secured their place. The IP will, by that point, have a new TV show. It'll be a cross medium sensation, and everyone's crazy about Mass Effect. Or they release it and it's not very good, and also the show on Amazon Prime that's coming out sort of either does great or underperforms. Either way, it could result in the studio itself being closed and the show continuing to be made, or it could result in the show only getting one season and the studio being closed. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of different ways that specifically that could go. But yeah, I think if any more Dragon Age is going to get made, it will be on the back of a successful Mass Effect 5.
Yep. With all that being said, I think I'm all good to go into our thank yous, though.
Oh, I was going to have just a general closing overall thought outside of the BioWare thing, which is...
Yep, feel free.
Yep. Yeah, which is just that, like... This is a slightly unstructured thought, but there are so many different directions that this can go, and so many potential roadblocks to seeing IPs that people genuinely do care about. Including the popular ones. In all fairness, right? The very popular Battlefield and even the sports games outside of the Dead Spaces and the Mass Effects and the Dragon Ages of the situation. This will have long arms. This will have long-reaching impact on all of these games, what form they take, and how you can enjoy them from this point moving forward. And it's kind of a it's kind of a weird situation to be in, again, because all we have here are questions and absolutely zero answers. But it's something to sort of keep your ear to the ground on, because video games are, I think, inherently changing, right? And this is not news to anybody, but the idea that as a medium, it has reached a point of cultural relevance where an entire government is looking at the industry and the medium as a worthwhile investment, possibly even more so than film, to spread their sort of PR blast, does sort of indicate a seismic shift in the way that the world is interacting with games as a medium, to me. So depending on how this goes for them, it may be something that we see happen more often. And we kind of need to ask ourselves individually if that's something we want at all. And sort of consider the moral side of purchasing and whatnot, and allow our decisions to come from, from a holistic understanding of the situation. So anyway, I don't know. There's a very unstructured and rambly thought, but do continue to sort of watch this space and be aware of the money behind the games that you're buying and playing, and because it's no longer just, trying to make the line go up in many ways. It is playing games with very serious politics. So yeah, ethical consumerism and all that, not actually calling for any specific actions, just be aware of the landscape, and draw your own conclusions from there. But yeah.
It's Aaron's way of saying that we're fucked.
Yeah, it's my way of saying that we're hurtling towards fucked a little bit.
Yeah, no ethical consumerism. There is no ethical consumerism in capitalism. It's too, people don't think about it.
No.
Vote with your wallet is a failing. The extent to which people do that normally is just whether they like something or not. So it's like, it's not invaluable. The information, it's an important thing that you're saying. I do not believe we can rely on that for any kind of meaningful change unless people have like a really, it's a depressing thing. It's just the reality. Yep. People too much immediate stuff going on. But generally I agree. Politics are getting in games. It's almost like they've always been there in reality.
Oh yeah, 100%.
but yeah.
On this scale and with this degree of investment, I don't know. I again, ethical consumerism is essentially a myth. It can only ever really be enacted on such a small scale as to have no significant impact. But being aware of the landscape is worthwhile in its own way. So yeah, just try to be aware, especially as practices like this potentially spread even further throughout the industry.
Propaganda.
Yeah.
Well, I guess with all that said, moving on to our thank yous, which are kind of increasingly more difficult to navigate, mostly because the people that we want to thank have decided that they don't want a digital footprint. Not because of any kind of anonymity that they want. I just am not sure that they're still doing the things that they were doing. But regardless, I'm still going to say thank you to Mosscat Market, who did, of course, help us with our art and our podcast logo. Please, please, please check them out. I believe it's just on Instagram now. I believe that they got rid of their Etsy page. Maybe if you beg them to give them money, beg enough to pay them, they will open that up again. But you should definitely check them out at minimum.
Yes, absolutely. And another interstitial thank you to our friend of the show who let us know about some of these changes. That's very much appreciated. So thank you. And of course, also thank you to Beach Girl. Beach Girl was and is the provider of our wonderful intro and outro music. They do still have some music on Spotify and other digital platforms, but it is becoming a little bit more sparse. I am going to personally petition them to re-release that first electric guitar album, which was their moniker before Beach Girl. So yeah, if you search them under Beach Girl or electric guitar, you may still be able to find some of their music, and it is still pretty darn good stuff. But yeah, still, regardless of all that, a hearty thank you to Beach Girl. Keep it up, and I'll be in touch about that electric guitar album.
Sweet. And with all that said, and such an uplifting story that we've covered today, I would like to say thanks to you all for listening. Again, please hit that like, subscribe, share with a friend or mortal enemy. And with that, I will see you on the next one. Thanks, everybody, and goodbye.
Indeed. Tweet this episode at Jared Kushner. Goodbye!
Disney could have, pulled down its pants and slammed its wiener on the table and said, no, we want them